What is an agnostic? An agnostic thinks it impossible to know the truth in matters such as God and the future life with which Christianity and other religions are concerned. Or, if not impossible, at least impossible at the present time. Are agnostics atheists? No, an atheist, like a Christian, holds that we can't know whether or not there is a God. The Christian holds that we can't know there is a God. The atheist adds, we can't know there is not. The agnostic suspends judgment, saying that there are not sufficient grounds either for affirmation or for denial. At the same time, an agnostic may hold that the existence of God, though not impossible, is very improbable. He may even hold it so improbable that it is not worth considering in practice. In that case, he is not far removed from atheism. His attitude may be that which a careful philosopher would have towards the gods of ancient Greece. If I were asked to prove that Zeus and Poseidon and Hera and the rest of the Olympians do not exist, I should be at a loss to find conclusive arguments. An agnostic may think the Christian God as improbable as the Olympians. In that case, he is, for practical purposes, at one with the atheists. Since you deny God as law, what authority do you accept as a guide to the court? An agnostic does not accept any authority in the sense in which religious people do. He holds that a man should think out questions of conduct for himself. Of course, he will seek to profit by the wisdom of others, but he will have to select for himself the people he is to consider wise, and he will not regard even what they say as unquestionable. He will observe that what passes as God's law varies from time to time. The Bible says both that a woman must not marry her deceased husband's brother, and that, in certain circumstances, she must do so. If you have the misfortune to be a childless widow with an unmarried brother-in-law, it is logically impossible for you to avoid disobeying God's law. How do you know what is good and what is evil? What does an agnostic and a sidereal saying? The agnostic is not quite so certain as some Christians are as to what is good and what is evil. He does not hold, as most Christians in the past held, that people who disagree with the government on abstruse points of theology ought to suffer a painful death. He is against persecution and rather chary of moral condemnation. As for sin, he thinks it not a useful notion. He admits, of course, that some kinds of conduct are desirable and some undesirable, but he holds that the punishment of undesirable kinds is only to be commended when it is deterrent or reformatory, not when it is inflicted because it is thought a good thing on its own account that the wicked should suffer. It was this belief in vindictive punishment that made men accept hell. This is part of the harm done by the notion of sin. Does an agnostic do whatever he pleases? In one sense, no. In another sense, everyone does whatever he pleases. Suppose, for example, you hate someone so much that you would like to murder. And why do you not do so? You may reply, because religion tells me that murder is a sin. But as a statistical fact, agnostics are not more prone to murder than other people. In fact, rather less so. They have the same motives for abstaining from murder as other people have. Far and away the most powerful of these motives is the fear of punishment in lawless conditions, such as a gold rush. All sorts of people will commit crimes, although in ordinary circumstances they would have been law-abiding. There is not only actual legal punishment, there is the discomfort of dreading discovery and the loneliness of knowing that, to avoid being hated, you must wear a mask, even with your closest intimates. And there is also what may be called conscience. If you ever contemplated a murder, you would dread the horrible memory of your victim's last moments or lifeless corpse. All this, it is true, depends upon your living in a law-abiding community. But there are abundant secular reasons for creating and preserving such a community. The basic writings of Bertrand Russell, I said that there is another sense in which every man does as he pleases. No, one but a fool indulges every impulse, but what holds a desire in check is always some other desire. A man's antisocial wishes may be restrained by a wish to please God, but they may also be restrained by a wish to please his friends, or to win the respect of his community, or to be able to contemplate himself without disgust. But if he has no such wishes, the mere abstract precepts of morality will not keep him straight. How does an agnostic regard the Bible? An agnostic regards the Bible exactly as enlightened clerics regard it. He does not think that it is divinely inspired. He thinks its early history legendary, and no more exactly true than that in Homer. He thinks its moral teaching sometimes good, but sometimes very bad. For example, Samuel ordered Saul, to kill not only every man, woman, and child of the enemy, but also all the sheep and cattle. Saul, however, let the sheep and cattle live, and for this we are told to condemn him. I have never been able to admire Elisha for cursing the children who laughed at him, or to believe what the Bible asserts that a benevolent deity would send to she bears to kill the children. How does an agnostic regard Jesus, the virgin birth, and the Holy Trinity? Since an agnostic does not believe in God, he cannot think that Jesus was that. Most agnostics admire the life and moral teachings of Jesus as told in the Gospels, but not necessarily more than those of certain other men. Some would place him on a level with Buddha, some with Socrates, and some with Abraham Lincoln, nor do they think that what he said is not open to question. Since they do not accept any authority as absolute, they regard the virgin birth as a doctrine taken over from pagan mythology, where such births were not uncommon. Zoroaster was said to have been born of a virgin. Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess, is called the Holy Virgin. They cannot give credence to it or to the doctrine of the Trinity, since neither is possible without belief in God. Can an agnostic be a Christian? The word Christian has had various different meanings at different times. Throughout most of the centuries since the time of Christ, it has meant a person who believed in God and immortality and held that Christ was God. But Unitarians call themselves Christians, although they do not believe in the divinity of Christ. And many people nowadays use the word God in image. What is an agnostic? Less precise sense than that which it used to bear. Many people who say they believe in God no longer mean a person or a trinity of persons, but only a vague tendency or power or purpose immanent in evolution. Others go in still further, mean by Christianity merely a system of ethics which, since they are ignorant of history, they imagine to be characteristic of Christians only. When, in a recent book, I said that what the world needs is love, Christian love or compassion, many people thought this showed some change in my youth, although, in fact, I might have said the same thing at any time. If you mean by a Christian a man who loves his neighbor, who has wide sympathy with sovereign, and who ardently desires a world freed from the cruelties and abominations which at present disfigure it, then certainly you will be justified in calling me a Christian. And in this sense, I think you will find more Christians among agnostics than among the Orthodox. But for my part, I cannot accept such a definition, apart from other objections to it, and seems rude to Jews, Buddhists, Mohammedans, and other non-Christians. So far as history shows, have been at least as apt as Christians to practice the virtues which some modern Christians arrogantly claim as distinctive of their own religion. I think also that all who called themselves Christians in an earlier time, and a great majority of those who do so at the present day, would consider that belief in God and immortality is essential to a Christian. On these grounds, I should not call myself a Christian, and I should say that an agnostic cannot be a Christian. But if the word Christianity comes to be generally used to mean merely a kind of morality, then it will certainly be possible for an agnostic to be a Christian. Does an agnostic deny that man has a soul? This question has no precise meaning unless we are given a definition of the word soul. I suppose what is meant is, roughly, something non-material, which persists throughout a person's life and even, for those who believe in immortality, throughout all future time. If this is what is meant, an agnostic is not likely to believe that man has a soul. But I must hasten to add that this does not mean that an agnostic must be a materialist. Many agnostics, including myself, are quite as doubtful of the body as they are of the soul. But this is a long story, taking one into difficult metaphysics. Mind and matter, alike, I should say, are only convenient symbols in discourse, not actually existing things. Does an agnostic believe in a hereafter, in heaven or hell? The question whether people survive death is one as to which evidences possible. Psychical research and spiritualism are thought by many to supply such evidence. An agnostic, as such, does not take a view about survival unless he thinks that there is evidence one way or the other. For my part, I do not think there is any good reason to believe that we survive death, but I am open to conviction if adequate evidence should appear. Heaven and hell are a different matter. Belief in hell is bound up with the belief that the vindictive punishment of sin is a good thing, quite independently of any reformative or deterrent effect that it may have. Hardly any agnostic believes this. As for heaven, there might conceivably someday be evidence of its existence through spiritualism, but most agnostics do not think that there is such evidence, and therefore do not believe in heaven. Are you northeast were afraid of God as judgment in denying him? Most certainly not. I also deny Zeus and Jupiter and Odin and Brahma, but this causes me no qualms. I observe that a very large portion of the human race does not believe in God and suffers no visible punishment in consequence. And if there were a God, I think it very unlikely that he would have such an uneasy vanity as to be offended by those who doubt his existence. How do agnostics explain the beauty and harmony of nature? I do not understand where this beauty and harmony are supposed to be found. Throughout the animal kingdom, animals ruthlessly prey upon each other. Most of them are either cruelly killed by other animals or slowly die of hunger. For my part, I am unable to see any very great beauty or harmony in the tapeworm. Let it not be said that this creature is sent as a punishment for our sins, for it is more prevalent among animals than among humans. I suppose the questioner is thinking of such things as the beauty of the starry heavens, but one should remember that stars every now and again explode and reduce everything in their neighborhood to a vague mist. Beauty, in any case, is subjective and exists only in the eye of the beholder. What is an agnostic? How do agnostics explain miracles and other revelations of God as omnipotence? Agnostics do not think that there is any evidence of the miracles in the sense of happenings contrary to natural law. We know that faith healing occurs and is in no sense miraculous. At Lord's, certain diseases can be cured and others cannot. Those that can be cured at Lord's can probably be cured by any doctor in whom the patient has faith. As for the records of other miracles, such as Joshua commanding the sun to stand still, the agnostic dismisses them as legends and points to the fact that our religions are plentifully supplied with such legends. There is just as much miraculous evidence for the Greek gods in Homer as for the Christian God in the Bible. There have been base and cruel passions, which religion opposes. If you abandon religious principles, you will demand mankind exist. The existence of base and cruel passions is undeniable, but I find no evidence in history that religion has opposed these passions. On the contrary, it has sanctified them and enabled people to indulge them without remorse. Cruel persecutions have been commoner in Christendom than anywhere else. What appears to justify persecution is dogmatic belief. Kindliness and tolerance only prevail in proportion as dogmatic belief decays. In our day, a new dogmatic religion, namely communism, has arisen. To this, as to other systems of dogma, the agnostic is opposed. The persecuting character of present-day communism is exactly like the persecuting character of Christianity in earlier centuries, insofar as Christianity has become less persecuting. This is mainly due to the work of freethinkers who have made dogmatists rather less dogmatic. If they were as dogmatic now as in former times, they would still think it right to burn heretics at the stake. The spirit of tolerance, which some modern Christians regard as essentially Christian, is, in fact, a product of the temper which allows doubt and is suspicious of absolute certainties. I think that anybody who surveys past history in an impartial manner will be driven to the conclusion that religion has caused more suffering than it has prevented. What is the meaning of life to the agnostic? I feel inclined to answer by another question. What is the meaning of the meaning of life? I suppose what is intended is some general purpose. I do not think that life in general has any purpose. It just happened. But individual human beings have purposes, and there is nothing in agnosticism to cause the basic writings of Bertrand Russell than to abandon these purposes. They cannot, of course, be certain of achieving the results at which they aim, but you would think ill of a soldier who refused to fight unless victory was certain. The person who needs religion to bolster up his own purposes is a timorous person, and I cannot think as well of him as of the man who takes his chances while admitting that defeat is not impossible. Does not the denial of religion mean the denial of marriage and chastity? Here again, one must reply by another question. Does the man who asks this question believe that marriage and chastity contribute to earthly happiness here below, or does he think that, while they cause misery here below, they are to be advocated as means of getting to heaven? The man who takes the latter view will no doubt expect agnosticism to lead to a decay of what he calls virtue, but he will have to admit that what he calls virtue is not what ministers to the happiness of the human race while on earth. And, on the other hand, he takes the former view, namely, that there are terrestrial arguments in favor of marriage and chastity. He must also hold that these arguments are such as should appeal to an agnostic. Agnostics, as such, have no distinctive views about sexual morality, but most of them would admit that there are valid arguments against the unbridled indulgence of sexual desires. They would derive these arguments, however, from terrestrial sources and not from supposed divine commands. Is not faith in reason at the northeast a dangerous creed? Is not reason in perfect court and inadequate without spiritual and moral law? No sensible man, however agnostic, has faith in reason alone. Reason is concerned with matters of fact, some observed, some inferred. The question whether there is a future life and the question whether there is a God concern matters of fact, and the agnostic will hold that they should be investigated in the same way as the question will there be an eclipse of the moon tomorrow? But matters of fact alone are not sufficient to determine action, since they do not tell us what ends we ought to pursue. In the realm of ends, Lei needs something other than reason. The agnostic will find his ends in his own heart and not in an external command. Let us take an illustration. Suppose you wish to travel by train from New York to Chicago. You will use reason to discover when the trains run, and a person who thought that there was some faculty of insight or intuition enabling him to dispense with a timetable would be thought rather silly. But no timetable will tell him that it is wise to. What is an agnostic? Travel to Chicago. No doubt, in deciding that it is wise, he will have to take account of further matters of fact. But behind all the matters of fact, there will be the ends that he thinks fitting to pursue. And this, for an agnostic as for other men, belong to a realm which is not that of reason, though it should be in no degree contrary to it. The realm I mean is that of emotion and feeling and desire. Do you regard all religions as forms of superstition or dogma? Which of the existing religions do you most respect, and why? All the great organized religions that have dominated large populations have involved a greater or less amount of dogma, but religion is a word of which the meaning is not very definite. Confucianism, for instance, might be called a religion, although it involves no dogma, and in some forms of liberal Christianity, the element of dogma is reduced to a minimum. Of the great religions of history, I prefer Buddhism, especially in its earliest forms, because it has had the smallest element of persecution. MMUNISM, like AGNOSTICISN, opposes religion. R. Agnostics, MMUNISTS. Communism does not oppose religion. It merely opposes the Christian religion, just as Mohammedanism does. Communism, at least in the form advocated by the Soviet government and the Communist Party, is a new system of dogma of a peculiarly virulent and persecuting sort. Every genuine agnostic must therefore be opposed to it. Do agnostics think that science and religion are impossible to reconcile? The answer turns upon what is meant by religion. If it means merely a system of ethics, it can be reconciled with science. If it means a system of dogma, regarded as unquestionably true, it is incompatible with the scientific spirit, which refuses to accept matters of fact without evidence, and also holds that complete certainty is hardly ever attainable. What kind of evidence? UODMVINCU. That God exists. I think that if I heard a voice from the sky predicting all that was going to happen to me during the next 24 hours, including events that the basic writings of Bertrand Russell would have seemed highly improbable, and if all these events then proceeded to happen, I might perhaps be convinced at least of the existence of some superhuman intelligence. I can't imagine other evidence of the same sort which might convince me, but so far as I know, no such evidence exists.